Okay, we are continuing with the June 2023 U.S. History Regents exam, the new framework, the first of the new framework exams. Having gotten through the multiple choice, let's take a look now at the short essay questions. On the exam, there will be 2 short essays and 1 long essay. The short essay questions, both of them will be similar in that they will each have 2 documents. So you'll be given a set of 2 documents, and you'll be asked to deal with them. So let's take a look at the questions on this exam. Short essay question set 1. Task: read and analyze the following documents, applying your social studies knowledge and skills to write a short essay of 2 or 3 paragraphs, in which you do the following. Describe the historical context surrounding the documents, to identify and explain the relationship between the events or ideas found in them. And they tell you the relationships could be cause and effect, similarity or difference, or turning point. Notice, to get full credit for the question, it's easy. You just have to do all the parts. First, you have to give historical context. What does that mean? That means you have to bring outside information to bear. You cannot just repeat what is in the documents. If you just find a couple of sentences in the documents and rewrite them, that is no good. The graders cannot give you credit. So you have to read both documents and figure out what is it they're talking about. What is this making reference to? What moment in history or specific event or sometimes an idea in history that became controversial or was debated or what have you. You must say something about it that is not in the documents that proves you recognize it, that you know something about it. It doesn't have to be a lot. It has to be enough to prove that. And give what these documents are talking about. Again, not summarizing the documents. I can't emphasize this enough. If all you do is summarize the documents or repeat it, that is not enough for the credit. You have to give information that sets them inside a historical context. The second thing you have to do is explain how those 2 documents are related to each other. And it seems, again, pretty obvious and simple, I'm sure, but I can't tell you how many kids don't do that, and you can't give the credit if you don't. So explaining the relationship, explaining means describing which is cause and which is effect, or which is talking about the cause of a particular event and which is the follow-on. They may not be related that way. They may be related in similarity and difference. So, for instance, if there are 2 documents about the Civil War, and one is from a northern soldier and one is from a southern soldier, obviously they're going to have a different perspective on that war. On the other hand, if it's a document from a Civil War soldier and a document from a World War I soldier, well, those 2 events don't have much to do with each other, but the experience of a soldier in wartime, often it's kind of the same. So it may be pointing out what a soldier's life like was in the Civil War and a soldier's life like in World War I and how similar they were. Turning point. Turning point is when you have a moment when there is change, some event that really changed how people looked at something. So just to pick an obvious example, when Thomas Paine, during the Revolution, wrote the pamphlet Common Sense, which you should remember, he wrote it in January of 1776. Before that, the revolution was about American colonists fighting for their rights as Englishmen. After he wrote it, American colonists began to talk about Maybe this war shouldn't be about our rights as Englishmen. Maybe now we should be fighting for our own new country, independence. And it shifted, was a turning point, what the war was really about. So by the time you get to July of 1776, we have the Declaration of Independence. So, again, that essay, at least 2 paragraphs, 1 paragraph in which you tell us about the 2 documents, the historical, what's going on around them, what is this time period, what is going on around the events that they are related to. And it's got to have information that is not in the documents themselves. It is not a summary of the documents. It is not just quoting them. And then second, you have to identify and explain the relationship. So you must say in the second paragraph what the relationship is. Pick one of them. It could fall into more than one category. That's okay. You just have to pick one of them. And then you have to explain why it's that relationship. So not just say, oh, it's cause and effect. What makes you say it's cause and effect? What in the documents tells you it's cause and effect? Which is the cause and which is the effect? Okay, so for this first one here, we have a big long paragraph here. And I'll pull it up just a bit. So document 1. There would be meat that had tumbled out on the floor in the dirt and sawdust, where the workers had trampled and spit uncounted billions of tuberculosis germs. Consumption's an old-fashioned word for tuberculosis. You know tuberculosis was a disease that you could pick up by breathing it in and went in your lungs, but you could also pick it up in other ways. So here you've got meat all over the floor being stomped on, spit on, etc. There would be meat stored in great piles in rooms, and the water from leaky roofs would drip over it. Thousands of rats would race about on it. It was too dark in these storage places to see well, but a man could run his hands over these piles of meat and sweep off handfuls of the dried dung, the manure of rats. These rats were nuisances, and the packers would put poisoned bread out for them. They would die, and then the rats, the bread, the poisoned bread, and the meat would all go in hoppers together. Hopper, if you don't know, is a big sort of a bin, and you threw the meat in this bin, and they would then grind it up to make sausage and stuff. This is no fairy tale and no joke. The meat would be shoveled into carts, and the man who did the shoveling would not trouble to lift out a rat even when he saw one. There were things that went into the sausages in comparison with which a poisoned rat was a tidbit. There was no place for the men to wash their hands before they ate their dinner, and so they made a practice of washing them in the water that was to be ladled into the sausage. So they'd wash their hands and then throw the dirty water into the sausage grinders. There were the butt ends of smoked meat and the scraps of corned beef and all the odds and ends of the waste of the plants that would be dumped into old barrels in the cellar and left there. By plants here, he's talking about the factories, the sausage factories. Under the system of rigid economy, which the packers enforced, there were some jobs that it only paid to do once in a long time. And among these was the cleaning out of the waste barrels. So they threw all the garbage in the barrels, and they didn't really dump it out much. Every spring they did it, and in the barrels would be dirt and rust and old nails and stale water, and cartload after cartload would be taken up and dumped into the hoppers with the fresh meat and sent out to the public's breakfast. Some of it they would make into smoked sausage, but as the smoking took time and was therefore expensive, they would call upon their chemistry department and preserve it with borax and color it with gelatin to make it brown. So again, you guys might not be familiar with borax. Borax is a chemical that is used as detergent. use it as cleaner. Actually, you use it as cleaner. You also use it as like ant and roach killer. All the sausage, their sausage came out of the same bowl, but when they came to wrap it, they would stamp some of it special, and for this they would charge 2 cents more a pound. Okay, now the source here, again, always look at the source. Upton Sinclair, The Jungle, 1906. That should trigger you. You should see The Jungle and remember that. Very famous, right? Upton Sinclair was one of the muckrakers. He was all about a progressive era, exposing problems in society to encourage government solutions to them. The muckrakers went after the monopolies. They went after dangerous chemicals being sold as medicine. They went after corruption in government, and they went after the filthy food industry. The Jungle, you should remember, was a book, it was actually a novel that he wrote about workers and described what it was like to work in the meat plants. So when you went into your butcher shop and you went and bought sausages or ground beef or whatever, he's telling you what's really in it is dirty, filthy meat, rats, bits of poisoned bread, the garbage and sweepings they threw aside into the barrels. It's got all of that stuff in it, and Americans were shocked to find this out. Okay, that's document 1. Now you take a look at document 2. Document 2, again, always look at the source, Meat Inspection Act, 1906, as amended 1967-2005. Notice it's June of 1906. This is February of 1906. They give you the actual months. So this comes first, and then this document comes second. Meat Inspection Act, an act, of course, is a law passed by Congress. So the law says, the Secretary of Agriculture shall cause to be made by experts in sanitation or by other competent inspectors, such inspection of all slaughtering, meat canning, salting, packing, rendering, or similar establishments in which amenable species of are slaughtered, and the meat food products thereof are prepared for commerce, as may be necessary to inform himself concerning the sanitary conditions of the same. All right, that's a little bit of legal language. What does it really say? The Secretary of Agriculture is going to hire experts in sanitation to make inspection of slaughterhouses, meat canning facilities, packing. Rendering is when you melt down the fat on meat, or similar establishments in which amenable species. Amenable means, it literally means sort of friendly, but species that would work for meat. So this is places where you're slaughtering cows for beef, pigs for pork, sheep and lambs for lamb and mutton. That's what he's talking about. So we're going to inspect these places. And prepared for commerce, that is for business, as may be necessary to inform himself concerning the sanitary conditions. So the Secretary of Agriculture is supposed to send inspectors in to check out these meat processing plants to inform himself about how sanitary they are, and then to prescribe the rules and regulations of sanitation under which such establishments shall be maintained. So the Secretary is supposed to inspect, and then he's supposed to go in and come up with rules to keep the places cleaner. Where the sanitary conditions of any such establishment are such that the meat food products are rendered adulterated is a fancy word for contaminated, he shall refuse to allow said meat or meat products to be labeled, marked, stamped, or tagged as inspected and passed. So what is this saying? Secretary of Agriculture is supposed to send inspectors in, make rules, and you can't sell the products unless they've been passed as coming from a clean and safe place. Okay. So what's the historical context? First, you have to write a paragraph that puts these two into context. The context, I would say, if I were writing this is early 1900s. It's that industrial age, yeah, where you've got now factory-style food processing in general, because there's pressure on these businesses to cut costs as much as possible and make money. They're cutting corners. They have no particular interest in making sure their products are safe, and the average American didn't know this. This is all context. And so guys like Upton Sinclair wrote books, newspaper articles, magazine articles exposing this problem, the muckrakers in general. So if you use that word, muckraker, if you use that word, progressive era, all of that becomes context. Now, what's the relationship between these two? The easiest one is cause and effect. Upton Sinclair's book was so popular and so famous, it caused a public outrage in March, April, May of 1906, demanding government action. Politicians, under pressure to do something to clean up this industry that everybody in America was buying meat, passed this law as the effect of that to start, for the first time, the federal government inspecting the food processing system and certifying, marking, stamping, tagging food as being safe, inspected, and clean. Cause and effect. So if you say both of those things, industrial age, progressive era, muckrakers pointing out the problem, informing Americans what they didn't know about where their food came from, and cause and effect, the popularity of Upton Sinclair's book led to political pressure to pass the Meat Inspection Act. Right there, you've now hit everything you need for all the points. So, based on this, again, you want to go back and make sure you've described the context, you've identified, named the relation, and then explained why that's the relationship. Okay, let's take a look at the second set. The second set will be similar and yet different. Set 2. You'll again be given two documents. Paragraph 1, you're going to describe the historical context once again. Paragraph 2 is now different. You will analyze one of the documents and explain how reliable it is as a source of evidence. Now, what does that mean? First, they will pick. They could say document 1 or document 2. You must be careful. You must respond to the document they pick, not the one you'd like to do. So if it asks for document 1 and you write about document 2, you're done. No points. So pay attention to that. Second, you must talk about whether or not it is a reliable source of evidence. And usually the answer will be a little bit subtle. It's reliable in one way, but not necessarily in another. You must also explain what makes it reliable or unreliable. Audience. Who is this document being written for? Purpose. Why is it being written? Bias. What is the presumption of the writer based on what you know historically? And point of view, how are they getting their information? So I'll give you an example if you have a letter from a soldier who just fought in the Battle of Gettysburg in the Civil War, how reliable is it as a source of information? Well, don't jump to a conclusion. Stop and think. Who is it being written by? It's being written by a soldier, some private in the Army, let's say. What's his point of view? And you can almost think about this physically. A soldier, what does he see of a battle? He sees his battle. A general might have a different point of view because the general sees the whole battle, the whole battlefield. He knows what's going on all across it. The soldier only knows what he sees in front of him, only knows his little part. That may change how reliable he is in telling the story of the battle. It may be very reliable as a source of information about what the average soldier thought of, what he saw, how he reacted, but it may not be reliable in describing the strategic situation because he's only got a little piece of it. Bias. I told you it's a soldier, a private in the Army, but I didn't say which Army. The point of view of a Union soldier and the point of view of a Confederate soldier, their bias might be very different. Purpose and audience, they often go together. So if the soldier is writing a letter to his commanding officer, a report, and the purpose of it is to report on what his company did in the battle, it might be a fairly reliable set of facts for whatever he knows, because he's making a kind of official report, and maybe it's a little bit objective. If he's writing that same letter, that soldier, to his mom is the audience. What is the purpose of the letter? It's to tell mom, I'm okay. And don't worry, I was in a battle, but it wasn't that big a deal. He's going to minimize the danger maybe he was in. If he's writing that same letter not to his mom, but to his girlfriend, well, all of a sudden he becomes the hero of the Civil War, and he single-handedly fought off the whole Confederate Army because, he wants to impress the girl. If he's writing to his buddy, it may not be as, he's certainly not going to talk to his buddy about how scared he was unless he's really, really tight with the guy, but that's going to affect how he colors the battle. And maybe a letter to a best friend is going to be a little bit more objective than it would be to his mom or his girlfriend. So his purpose in writing, is he writing an official report? Is he writing to calm mom down? Is he writing to make himself a hero to the girlfriend? And the audience, which often affects the purpose, that's going to change how reliable it is. A soldier's letter may be very reliable for how it feels to be a soldier, and yet not at all reliable for what actually happened that day at the Battle of Gettysburg. So when you analyze the document, you have to decide, easiest thing for you to do is to decide one of these. Focus on audience or purpose or bias or point of view, and then try to make a case as to whether it's very reliable or not so reliable. Don't say it is or it isn't. Don't say yes or no, because in history that's usually not the case. More or less, and then why? What makes it more or less reliable? So let's take a look at the set that you have here. Document 1. The bloody massacre perpetrated in King Street, Boston on March 5th, 1770 by a party of the 29th Regiment. And sadly, this is a very small picture. Some of the students I have in class, I show them this picture quite large, and you can see all sorts of interesting things in the background. The historical context you should instantly be thinking, I hope, is the Boston Massacre. Notice this is engraved and printed by Paul Revere, The revolution has not started. Be careful, don't make that mistake. That you lose points for that. The revolution begins in 1775. So this is 5 years before the revolution. It's a lead up to the revolution. We know in real life, you should know, an angry mob kind of attacked a bunch of soldiers. Somebody among those soldiers panicked and fired a gun. In the panic, they all kind of shot, and a couple of people were killed. In Paul Revere's version, he will be the guy of the midnight ride of Paul Revere, who at the Battle of Lexington and Concord, he warns everybody, famous figure. Long before this, 5 years before the revolution starts, he's already agitating against the British government. And his version is, here's a bunch of soldiers lined up in a row with an officer commanding them to shoot into the crowd. This never happened this way. You should know that. The bloody massacre, as though this was a deliberate murder perpetrated by these British soldiers. Okay, Paul Revere was not there that night. He was not involved, although he did live in the city of Boston. He heard about it later. He engraved this picture based upon what he wanted people to feel about this. And so this gets sent all over the colonies to get them angry at the British for what he considered to be this terrible outrage. The second document here is transcript of British Captain Thomas Preston's testimony from the Boston Massacre. Captain Preston was this guy. He was the commander that night. And when they put the soldiers on trial, Preston gave testimony about what actually happened. And under oath in front of the court, he said the following. In my way, there I saw the people in great commotion, right? So a lot of hubbub, and heard them use the most cruel and horrid threats against the troops. In a few minutes after I reached the guard, about 100 people passed it and went towards the custom house where the king's money is lodged. So the custom house was a sort of treasury in Boston where the money for the government was kept to pay the salaries of the soldiers, and it was the money that was collected in taxes. So here he is, he's got a surging crowd of people who are headed to the treasury. They immediately surrounded the sentry post there, and with clubs and other weapons, threatened to execute their vengeance on him. So the sentry was the guard. There was one soldier that was standing guard, and these guys show up with, bats and weapons, and they threatened to beat him up. I was soon informed by the townsmen their intention was to carry off the soldier from his post and probably murder him. And by the way, such things did happen in the colonies, so it was not a crazy thought. On which I desired him to return for further intelligence. And he soon came back and assured me he had heard the mob declare they would murder him. So the captain runs into one of the Bostonian citizens who tells him this is what he heard. So the Captain Preston sends the citizen back in and says, go listen, find out again if that's what they're going to do. Yep, they're going to kill him. This, I feared, might be a prelude to their plundering of the king's chest. So they're going to kill the sentry and then steal the treasury. On my asking the soldiers why they fired without orders, so bang, the guns go off, bunch of people dead. Captain Preston then goes to the soldiers and says, why did you shoot? Who the hell told you to shoot? They said they heard the word fire and supposed it came from me. So the soldiers just heard somebody shout fire, so somebody shot. This might be the case, as many of the mob called out fire, fire, but I assured them, the men, that I gave no such order. My words were, don't fire, stop your firing. In short, it was scarcely possible for the soldiers to know who had said fire or don't fire or stop your firing. On the people's assembling again to take away the dead bodies, the soldiers, supposing them coming to attack them, were making ready to fire again, which I prevented by striking up their firelocks with my hands. So a firelock is a flintlock. That's the rifle. So what's the picture here? Angry mob comes after the soldiers with baseball bats. Well, it's not baseball yet. And, torches and stuff. They're going to kill one of them. The soldiers hear somebody shout fire, so a couple of them pop off rounds into the crowd. Their captain tells them, stop, stop, stop. When the crowd surges back again to grab the people who've been wounded, the soldiers are getting ready to fire, and the captain goes in and knocks their rifles up, right? Striking their firelocks with my hand, he says. So pushing the rifles up, saying, no, 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 in the air, don't fire, don't fire. So this is the captain's own version of what happened. So clearly, two completely different versions of what happened that night. The context, you should say, first paragraph is always historical context. This is about the Boston Massacre. Bostonians angry about the taxation that was being on them. The British soldiers were there. The crowd was looking for, ways to rebel, and got out of hand. This was happening as a lead-up to the revolution. They don't know the revolution is coming, but it's one of the many incidents that will finally wind up in the revolution. That's enough for the historical context, saying just that. Then you have to take document one, and again, it could be either one, but you have to go with the one the Regents picks. They pick document one and talk about its reliability. Paul Revere was biased against the British. We know from early on he was part of the rebellion against the Stamp Act, which is before this. He was part of the Sons of Liberty. He would later be one of the key figures at the start of the revolution. So this was a guy who was already did not like the British and wanted to paint them in a bad light. That's a bias. Point of view. His point of view, and again, as I said, think about point of view in a physical way. Where is he standing for this historical event? How does he see it? And the answer is he doesn't. He was not there. He is getting the account secondhand and making up the details as he went. His audience are colonists. This was not meant to be shown in England. He didn't really care if it was shown in England, I guess. I guess it could have been. He wasn't trying to prevent it, but he was targeting it toward fellow colonists, and the purpose was to get them angry at the British. Therefore, he's going to paint the British in the worst possible light. It's therefore not a very reliable record of what actually happened that night. So, when you analyze in the second paragraph, you have to say, based upon one of the above, and you could pick any of them, based upon the audience or based upon the purpose, or if you want both, based upon the audience and purpose, you don't lose points for saying that, it's not very reliable, but then you have to say, here's why. You can't just say that, you have to say, here's why. Why is it unreliable? Because it's meant to provoke an emotional reaction. It's propaganda, trying to get colonists angry at the British because Bostonians in particular had a beef with the British government for the taxes that were being laid on the port of Boston, the import and export that was going in and out of there. If you hit all those points, you got full credit, and it's easy to get that credit. If you don't hit all those points, then you start losing credit along the way. Okay, we'll leave it there and pick up with the long essay, the DBQ, in the next little video.